All is not well for our poor, beleaguered TV executives and producers in their effort to expand Kerbal kind to another planet, to become a multi-planet civilization, an incredibly laudable goal, and if in the meantime they can make an incredibly popular and successful reality TV show, then all the better. Sadly, last time they experienced, well, a bit of a setback. Gembe Kerbin, the highly qualified and carefully selected Kerbmate engineer, who will be, of course, traveling to Duna as part of the mission, well, she accidentally left a little bit on orbit while she was flailing around, trying to figure out what to do after receiving virtually no training whatsoever. So she left a little piece of debris on orbit. That piece of debris sadly collided with a freshly launched and rather expensive satellite created by Hobo Industries in collaboration with Duna One, precisely to broadcast the reality TV show all around Kerbin in some kind of manner that was unclear at the time. However, of course, because the satellite has now been destroyed, a huge legal battle has erupted in which Hobo Industries are claiming that Duna One and a bit has sole responsibility for the accident, as it was their Kerbmate who deposited the item in the orbital path of the Hobo satellite, and in fact it was the Duna One and a bit television producers who were confident in their ability to command and control the mission, what with the fact that they have been on at least 2 correspondence courses in orbital mechanics and rocket design now, and of course have launched a handful of moderately successful missions of their own. And therefore, with the legal teams clashing in court and all the funds for the project more or less being held in reserve in case of a massive settlement, the final launch pre-departure to Duna has had to be scrapped, which means no test of the colony module, no test of the entry, descent, and landing systems, and, well, I mean, that's going to inject an awful lot of peril, which, of course, is a good thing as far as the TV producers are concerned, but in order to save a little bit of weight and to increase the safety margins moderately, the polar orbiting survey satellite component of the departure module is going to be removed, and instead what they're going to do is use some leftover bits of rocket and some leftover bits of technology to retask the WizScan Ultra P in order to perform this duty. Now, the WizScan Ultra P, of course, was the polar orbiting satellite that was dispatched to, first of all, to the WizStar research platform, and then onto polar orbit. So it has these 4 nuclear engines, which means it should have plenty of delta V if it can be fueled up. Now, it's got a reasonable amount of fuel on board and could probably nearly make it as is, but to be on the safe side, we're going to send a servicing mission because it needs some extra bits and pieces added to it, and we need to take all the oxidizer out that we forgot to take out before. So here we have the purple flag, which is actually the product of some of the junior members of the team, and therefore is much more efficient and well designed than perhaps it might otherwise have been. This, of course, is because the TV executives and producers are mostly off at cocktail parties trying to badmouth Hobo Industries and generally drum up support for their side of the court case. However, this has meant that, as we say, we've got a relatively efficient spacecraft here. It's pretty robust as well. It's got a pair of leftover nuclear rocket engines from the design of the WizStar Ultra P in the first place, which means it has loads of delta V, and it should be able to reach the polar orbit that the WizScan is in with tons of fuel to spare, which it can use to fuel it up. And more importantly, lots of empty space in those tanks, which can take the oxidizer off. Now, we're going to send Juggly Kerbin and Gembe Kerbin. Gembe Kerbin, of course, is eager to make up for her error by going on this mission, not to mention the fact that she is the only engineer, and therefore the only one capable of performing these kind of on-orbit repairs and servicings, and Juggly Kerbin needs experience piloting. Now, we're at launch day, and the WizScan Ultra P is directly overhead, as is its orbital path, which is, of course, very important when you're launching into a polar orbit, because we don't want to spend a lot of delta V changing our inclination. And the engines are firing. There we go. We have a liftoff of the purple flag servicing mission on its quest to visit the WizScan Ultra P and convert it from a domestic satellite to an interplanetary probe capable of not just visiting the planet Duna, but surveying it and indeed returning pictures and communication relays and all sorts of other very useful things indeed. Of course, we are launching onto a polar trajectory, so we are tilting north rather than east as we normally would, accelerating rapidly under the push of those 3 liquid rocket boosters. Those, of course, were available. They had already been built, and therefore the cost was minimal. The main saving here, of course, is not having to disregard an entire colony entry module. So the test module, which has already been built, is effectively being saved for the final Duna mission, which of course has various other implications, but we will come to that at a later date. There we go, the engine's firing strongly as we continue on into that polar orbit. Gembe Kerbin in the engineer's compartment and Juggly Kerbin looking around, checking everything is A-OK, and indeed it does seem to be nominal. This seems to be probably by far the best launch to date. Juggly Kerbin, of course, is very pleased about that, as is Gembe Kerbin, as they are both eager for nothing to go awry with this mission, as they both have points to prove. Staging there, and we're on the final injection stage here before we are down to the purple flag itself and its nuclear rocket engines. Juggly just making a quick attitude adjustment before firing up that final ascent stage. Of course, they are very aware that they need to ensure the final ascent stage is disposed of correctly and drops back into the atmosphere to burn up harmlessly, possibly colliding with some poor Kerbal's house somewhere. But as long as it doesn't smash up an expensive communication satellite, then that's fine, really, isn't it? There we go, the engine's firing up, Juggly Kerbin making that final injection burn. And we see the apoaps rising up there. There we go, it's still just inside the atmosphere, and we are separating, and we're now on those nuclear rocket engines alone. They, of course, have much lower thrust, but higher specific impulse, making them much more efficient. It does mean, however, that the burn will take quite a long time. Fortunately, you don't have to sit through all of that. Through the power of editing, we are able to skip large chunks of time as we continue to raise that apoaps. Interesting side note here, this will be the highest that any Kerbal has been in this particular universe to date, reaching a peak altitude of 750 kilometers above Kerbin. A record which, of course, will not stand for very long, because they are going to go an awful lot higher and an awful lot further very soon when they make their departure for the planet Duna. And another side note, as we watch the beautiful celestial dance of these 2 spacecraft as Juggly Kerbin brings them into proximity, is that a bit of a debate has broken out on the planet Kerbin about precisely how to pronounce the name of the 4th planet from Kerbal. Some pronounce it Duna, some pronounce it Duna, some have even been known to pronounce it Duna. Which is correct? Who can say? But for now, that is going to have to wait for another day, because Juggly Kerbin is making the final approach burn as she nulls all relative velocity to the Wiscan Ultra P, and therefore matching the orbits of these 2 space vehicles hurtling around the planet Kerbin. Now, of course, the Space Center taking control of the Wiscan Ultra P and retracting one of the solar panels in order to allow the 2 spacecraft to come even closer together, thus bringing the equipment bay of the purple flag within range for a direct connection of goods from one vehicle to the other to avoid all of the unpleasantness that we experienced last time we attempted to do an on-orbit servicing mission. Of course, close proximity is also required for the refueling pipes to be connected, and so generally speaking, Juggly Kerbin is responsible here for making sure that the 2 spacecraft come as close as she dare before sending Gembe Kerbin out to perform the actual servicing mission, which of course starts by hooking up a fueling pipeline between the 2. Now, in order to do that, she is going to have to drill into the fuel tanks for the Wiscan Ultra P and attach a fueling nozzle, which of course she can do just like that. Because she is Gembe Kerbin, the awesome and unstoppable Gembe Kerbin. She has now got the refueling pipe, which, when connected, should also perform the duty of keeping the 2 spacecraft rigidly connected to each other, and therefore preventing any additional drift or issues of that nature. Pipelines connected, fuel pumps armed, they are able to fill the tanks of the Wiscan Ultra P with that crucial liquid fuel, and perhaps more importantly, offload all of that unnecessary oxidizer which the nuclear engines cannot make use of. Now, again, preparing to transfer some of the scientific equipment which is going to be needed, but they discover, of course, that actually they are still just a little bit too far away. So, after deconnecting the fuel hoses, the two spacecraft are brought even closer together. In fact, they're brought so close together that, well, let's just say they're very close together. Gembe very quickly attaches the rigid fuel hose once again, which of course nulls that relative motion you were beginning to see, and sets to work installing all of the new scientific equipment. We've got a planetary survey camera, we've got a narrowband scanner, we've got extra camera and lighting equipment for the TV audiences back at home. Now we need to take a look at the high gain antenna. Now we have been having issues with this high gain antenna. We have been having problems getting it to deploy, so Gembe is going to just remount it very quickly, which seems to, if we just test it now and operate it, it is now successfully deployed and operating. So we can call that a successful repair of the high gain antenna system, which means communication with Earth is going to be possible, which of course is very important. Now we did bring up a secondary antenna anyway, just in case there were problems, so that's going to get attached in an alternative orientation. Plus, we have a tertiary transmitter, which is going to be used for communicating between the Duna ground station and the satellite so that they can transmit data and receive transmissions and generally do all sorts of good stuff like that without necessarily having to have the transmitters working down below. Now, again, just repositioning the planetary survey camera there to avoid a possible issue with a strut passing through the optics, which, you know, probably would have been fine, but we're just going to make sure. We're going to make sure. Gembe now doing a complete survey, moving around the back of those highly radioactive engines, looking over the spacecraft, ensuring that there has been no obvious damage, perhaps by micrometeorites or the odd forgotten and abandoned piece of spacecraft that might have collided with it at some point during its mission. But no, everything seems to be fine. So, returning to the purple flag, she closes the service bay, disconnects the fueling pipeline, returns to the command pod, and prepares for departure. Juggly Kerman fires up those reaction control jets, moving the purple flags to a safe distance away from the Wiscan Ultra P. Ground control now perform a few tests, making sure that everything is working satisfactorily, opening and closing the various transmitters, opening the solar panels again, activating the new science pieces of equipment, and ensuring that it's all working satisfactorily. And, of course, this whole time the purple flag has remained on station just in case additional efforts were made, but now that it is working fine, they are able to begin their return to the planet Kerbin. And this, of course, will be for the last time before Duna departure, because there are no more missions planned. This is the final re-entry. This is the final time when something might, of course, go wrong as well for these two Kerb mates that might potentially prevent them from partaking in the Duna mission. They have separated from the service module that is going to burn up happily in the Kerbin atmosphere, dumping the radioactive contents of those engines somewhere, who knows where. Nobody bothered to actually calculate that. Juggly Kerman, of course, has plotted this re-entry trajectory to bring them down to the Space Center. At least that's what she thinks she's done. In actual fact, it turns out that the descent profile was not properly thought through, and in fact, because of the extreme speeds that this vehicle has coming down from 750,000 kilometers, it is actually going to simply skip right through the atmosphere and go back out the other side, which is a bit of a worry because all of the snacks were aboard the service module, so they have only what is left in the cabin. And realizing what's happening, Gembe Kerman basically grabs the last packet and scuffs it down. So they are now going to basically skip out of the atmosphere, have to perform a complete orbit, and hope that they can come back down the next time, because otherwise they're going to get into trouble controlling this spacecraft. In fact, what happens, as I understand, is if they run out of snacks, they basically go on strike and refuse to do anything, which of course means pointing the spacecraft with its heat shield down, for example, and indeed firing the parachutes in order to descend and land softly. Fortunately, it doesn't look like that's going to happen. They come back down on the next orbit, and they are still sufficiently snacked up to be able to perform their various duties. However, a different fault with the spacecraft creates a sudden blackout. back on board. Juggly Kerman is powerless to do anything about that right now as the spacecraft plummets through the atmosphere on its final terminal descent right over Kerbin's poles. Fortunately, the parachutes fire successfully, unaffected by the repeated exposures to re-entry heating that they have experienced. There goes, I think, some component, possibly the heat shield, possibly the transmitter, who knows. Anyway, the vehicle comes down in the freezing winds of the North Polar ice cap, touching down on the frozen pack ice and leaving these two Kerbmates out of contact with the Space Center, who have no idea what has happened to them. Gembe Kerman, however, has a plan. First of all, well, she tries to take her frustrations out a little bit on something that was blocking the hatch a little bit there, just to make sure that they can get in and out safely and successfully. Of course, blowing something up is Gembe Kerman's default fallback solution to most problems. However, first of all, she realizes just how cold it is, and she puts her helmet back on, and quickly she sets to work, because of course their situation is dire. They are in a crippled command pod, almost out of power, stranded in the frozen north of the planet Kerbin. Nobody knows they're here, so quickly she sets to work using a few leftover bits and pieces from the servicing mission to assemble a ground pylon with a transmitter and a little aerial here so that she can send out an emergency distress beacon, because of course the snacks are gone, the cold is pressing in. Even with their spacesuits, they cannot survive for long in this terrible place without rescue. Gembe Kerman and Juggly Kerman, has anybody heard you? Are they coming?